Welcome to Fandom and Wellness,
a podcast about the complex relationship between fandom and mental health.
Disclaimer, we are not psychiatrists or psychologists. We are just fangirls with a vested interest in mental health. I'm Arkeida.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Danielle.
And on this episode, we're going to be talking about healthy relationships. So, what defines or makes a successful and healthy relationship?
The first two I want to bring up are communication and boundaries. According to the internet, the hotline.org, communication and boundaries are two major components. So communication allows you and your partner to have a deep understanding of each other, and when you feel comfortable communicating, that's often when you have the best kind of relationship. There's usually a strong sense of trust between you guys, and you're able to discuss everything, including very difficult topics. I think that bringing it to fandom really quickly is that the structure of comedic episodes allow for people in relationships to kind of have a conflict and then resolve it, and usually it's by communicating. And I'm going to be talking a lot about Ben and Leslie from Parks and Rec throughout this episode, because I think they portray a very healthy relationship, even though they're very different people, because they do a lot of the things that are important in a relationship regarding communication, like treating each other with respect, listening to each other, and compromising. I think compromise is probably one of the biggest issues that can come between people.
Yeah, definitely.
An inability to compromise, and I usually visualize it as two hands reaching toward each other, and if they stop short of each other, they cannot compromise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Jesus touching that. What?
Exactly. What I'm saying is that every relationship is like your relationship with God.
Oh my god!
It's also funny that they're your main example, because we happen to be doing the episode on Galentine's Day, also Palentine's Day.
That's true.
If you want to be more inclusive.
Yeah, and one thing I like about their relationship, and I think a lot, and I would want that in my own, is that they're friends as well as partners.
Lovers.
Yeah, I was is lovers a weird word to say?
Also,
I call my Ben lover.
Funny.
Yes, all Bens are good. I stand
Yes.
all Bens.
Yes. Something very funny that did not click in my head until you just said it is Palentine's Day. Because I understand Valentine's Day and Galentine's Day, but I've been seeing Palentine's Day circulating for weeks now. And in my head, I totally thought that it was Palpatine that they were talking about. And I'm like, why would you want Palpatine as a And I really thought it was Palentine's, Palpatine, but I was
Now you know.
sorely incorrect.
It's just an effort to use more inclusive words.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I like that, and not Palpatine. Makes more sense.
Yeah. I also think that Superman and Lois Lane are really good at communication. He tells her who she kind of figures out who he is, and then he brings her to the Fortress of Solitude.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big trope with superhero comics, and it's whether or not they tell their partner / when they tell their partner. So I feel like their relationship throughout the years has had a lot of trust and respect towards each other. Clark Kent obviously highly respects Lois Lane.
Mm-hmm. And is it okay if I bring up a bad example of communication?
Yeah.
Or especially that trope, because I watched The Flash for a couple seasons, and of course they have the trope where Iris is not a dumb person, and she will be there's something weird happening with you, Barry. But I felt like Barry was basically gaslighting her, because every time she figured something out, he'd be like, no, it's just your imagination or whatever.
Yeah.
So in that case, I thought it was it's basically him lying to her. And usually, like, with superheroes, you kind of have to have that element, unless, like, they figure it out or whatever. But, like, in that case, it felt so much like gaslighting that it made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, like, so, like, superheroes' whole thing is like, oh, well, if people in my life find out, then other people will find out, and then they'll become under attack. But it's like, if this is your partner that you're spending your life with, then you need to tell them for their own safety, if nothing else, and so that they can decide if that's the kind of life that they want. It's not fair to them to live that life. But also, in the comic books, Barry Allen does not tell Iris West that he's the Flash until after they are married, which is not cool.
Nope.
No.
It's like, why am I getting kidnapped? I don't know. Like, that's like, at least tell me why I'm getting kidnapped, you know? It's so annoying. But yeah.
Another really good example of a healthy relationship that has open communication is Zoe and Wash from Firefly. They are very open in talking to each other about how they feel, the goals that they want to set, and even though she is technically higher ranking on Serenity, she doesn't hold that over his head, and he in return respects her for that. It can be a power dynamic if somebody does lord it over your head that you're in a better position or you're making more money, and instead he chooses to support her, and she understands that at the end of the day she still has to put her marriage is still a priority, so she's not going to, even though she has this high ranking, she's not going to put everything she has into her job because she wants to have a successful marriage with her husband. And there are so many instances where Mel is demanding things of her and she's like, I have to care for my husband.
Yeah, I feel like, I think that with a lot of examples in heterosexual romantic relationships within fandoms, it seems to be that, like, the healthier ones are when the female partner, like, has kind of some sort of position of power, and the man is, like, showing respect to her, and, like, instead of trying to control her or be jealous of her or anything like that, which obviously is the same in real relationships. But basically, like, as opposed to when you see in a fandom when the female partner is just kind of like that superhero's girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the better the writer writes that person's story, I guess, is really the point I'm trying to make. The more fleshed out they are.
The more fleshed out they are. And I think what's so hard is that there's so many fandoms out there that show unhealthy and toxic relationships that when you do actually see one, it's a little harder to comprehend it, but it's also so refreshing. And I hate that we have to say, oh, it's refreshing to see a healthy relationship portrayed, like, in the media, because so much of us, like, growing up with these stories or seeing these stories even in our adult lives, kind of, like, base things on them and consider them to be couple goals.
Yeah, it was so hard for us to find any, like, truly healthy relationships in media because a lot of them are toxic, and, like we talked about in our last episode, without the audience often even realizing it.
Yeah, it's also very hard. It's harder, as I was kind of saying before, like just like watching a film to really get a sense for what someone's relationship is versus like a series or like.
Mm-hmm.
Like versus like 50 years of like Superman like comic books or like, you know, like 5 seasons or whatever, however long Parks and Rec was.
Yeah, they only really ever capture the romantic part in movies usually. The actual romancing that like ends. And then
it's a whirlwind. It's always a whirlwind.
Yeah, it's always a whirlwind. There's often, like we mentioned in the last episode, a super high intensity situation. And also, going back to what you said before about the woman needing to be fleshed out, it's like, it's often because they don't have their own storyline.
Yeah.
That, like, you don't see a good kind of push and pull between the two people. It's mostly just the sun and the earth revolving around it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But, like, when there's a strong, powerful female character, it's usually the male usually has their own storyline too, but now they both have their own goals and their own ideas for what they want their lives to be, and it's not just someone pulling the other person along.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned couple goals, and there's not Fandom, but we had Margot on one of our previous episodes, and Margot and her husband are actually couple goals for me. They're like really amazing, and she gave me one of the best words of advice that I've ever been given, and it's basically like you should never be fighting to win or like fighting to like be right. You should be fighting to resolve.
Interesting.
Which is very, very, very hard in a marriage, because you both always think you're right, and most people are pretty stubborn. But basically, like as soon as you are just trying to like win the argument, you've already lost, because you're not taking that other person's feelings into account at all.
Yeah, something
that I find very helpful, and I'm trying to work on more, not just romantically, but in all relationships, is basically like asking if someone is looking for empathy or advice, like when they come to vent to you, because I find that most of the time people actually just want empathy and not advice. But a lot of times people don't know what to say and are uncomfortable sitting in those feelings with people, so they like feel like they have to give advice.
I think we mentioned this in our grief episode. It's because we want to fix the problem, but sometimes you can't fix the problem.
Exactly.
And sometimes the person that needs to vent or air their grievances already knows like the process or the steps they need to go to fix the problem, but they have a lot on their mind and a lot like weighing them down. They need to get it out. So sometimes it's just easier to listen and be like, man, that sucks. Do you want a hug?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially in romantic relationships where you're like with the one person all the time, I find that like you tend to try to like kind of like teach your partner in those situations instead of just giving advice. You're almost like, it's almost like you're trying to teach them how to be better. Like, because you're like, this will help them so much. But like, that's not what someone wants to hear in that moment, and it will not be good. So it's just like, basically like realizing like when is the right time to say the right things. You know what I mean? And like what your partner like needs to hear to feel better.
And I think that, I think maybe we'll talk more about the love languages in another episode, but that goes into it, like knowing what your like partner wants and which love language speaks to them the most, and communicating that way. Because communication isn't about talking only. It's about showing you how much you love them with acts of kindness or touch or whatever they like.
And also listening.
Yes, correct. And like, I think that a lot of these communication issues have to do with your mental health and like how you see the world. For example, if you have a habit of projecting onto other people what you think they're thinking about you, and you bring that into a relationship, that can be problematic because sometimes your perception of what other people are thinking is incorrect.
Yeah, that's something that like when I went to therapy, I had to work on that a lot, because that is something that I am constantly doing. I'm always assuming to know how other people feel about me. So like my therapist had to be basically like, you need to trust like Ben when he is telling you how he is feeling about you. Like, don't put words in his mouth. And so like, I think one of the reasons why our relationship worked out so well was because I basically went into our relationship, and like anytime I felt myself trying to project, I wouldn't let myself. So
impressive.
where in previous relationships I always did. Another really important thing is to basically rework the language that you're using to be less about the other person and more about your own capacity, like what you can handle. So basically, like, instead of just like being like, stop talking to me, you would say like, oh, I don't have the emotional energy for an argument right now.
Mm-hmm. So it's less of a command?
It's less of a shutdown.
Okay.
And more about like, we can come back to this. Like, I know that something that like with like Ben and I, basically like, because I have like severe abandonment issues. So like, if our fight results in like him walking away, for example, I get very upset to the point where like I feel like I can't like move past it or do anything until we talk and resolve the argument. So like what I've asked of him is like, if we're having an argument, to basically be like, okay, I need to take a break for X amount of time and then we'll come back and discuss further. And like that helps my brain a lot.
I think a part of that is also the idea that you don't want, when it doesn't resolve, you just know it'll come up again.
Yeah, definitely. But in general, just like the language that we use is very important.
Right.
A fandom example of reworking how you speak to your partner, future partner, etc. is Harry Potter. Not specifically Harry Potter, sorry, but Ron and Hermione, because throughout the beginning of the series, he was not necessarily very kind to her, even though she's literally saved their asses on more than one occasion. And it takes a lot of learning on his part to, one, not only realize that he likes her, because I don't know what it's like growing up with 7 brothers like he does. Like, I just do not. But also realizing how he should be communicating with her, because you do see at the end of it, they do end up having a marriage and relationship together, and even like going into the cursed child, they have a very, I don't want to say typical marriage because it's a very interesting marriage, but they are happy with each other. And it all comes from like him having to learn how to communicate to her and also not be a total asshole to her.
Not pull her pigtails.
Yes.
Yeah, very good example. So the next thing we want to talk about is, it's basically kind of like on the border of boundaries and communication. It's about psychological boundaries. And basically, I love this podcast called Love Link, which is by Sina Simone and Simone Humphrey. Sina Simone is actually who was my therapist in New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's funny that I listen to her podcast now instead of going to her as a therapist.
Amazing.
Yeah. So there was an episode.
Free therapy. Sorry.
Yeah, I wish. There's an episode. I highly recommend you listen to it. It's only like a half hour long, called Boundaries, with Dr. Amelia Kaplan Romanowski. And on it, they're kind of talking about like protective versus containment boundaries. And I found the whole thing to be so incredibly interesting, and both Ben and I have listened to it several times. So it's like really helped me realize basically like how different communication, how different two different people's communication styles can be within a relationship, and how deeply that impacts the relationship, and how if you just try harder to understand the other person's communication style and their boundaries, then that will like they'll greatly improve your relationship. So like they obviously go much more into this in the episode, but just to like kind of summarize it, basically like protective and listening boundaries, they basically protect you from what other people are saying. So like if you have bad boundaries, which I do, you basically like over personalize everything and like blame yourself for things or get easily hurt. So like I always think everyone hates me, even though they don't. So like that's like an example of that. Good boundaries would be good boundaries. This is like very hard. You're taking responsibility for your behavior and impact on others without feeling ashamed. It's very hard to.
That's hard. Yes,
it's easy for me to take responsibility for my behavior and impact, but it's not easy to do that without being like, you know.
It almost feels impossible.
Yes, that's extremely difficult to do. You'll see. I feel like you'll see this a lot with like like social justice conversations where people are trying to be allies, but they fell short. And instead of just like giving like a really good apology, they'll have to include something to make the people feel a little bit bad for them.
I understand what you're saying. It's like you're apologizing, but like while you're apologizing, you're like, I know I suck. And instead of it's like
yes,
that self-deprecation of yourself kind of lessens the apology.
Yes.
Because it feels like now that other person has to like be like, no, it's okay. You're really not. When it's more meaningful for you to own up and be like, this is how I can be better, instead of saying I'm a shitty person, because it's not solving anything. Yeah.
That's like, I think the best scenario that I can like think of for like currently what's going on. Definitely. So then the containment or speaking boundary, it basically protects you from saying or doing things you'll regret. So it's like that voice in your head that's like, yo, don't do that. So like, yeah. So like bad speaking boundaries would be like yelling or like fits of anger and rage, cursing. I mean, you know, cursing like for, you know, shitty reasons, not just because
like cursing at them and
cursing at someone like aggressively. Sarcasm is also on that list because it forces the listener to try to understand what the speaker means. And like in good boundary work, you're actually trying to just be very clear with your intentions.
Right.
Yeah. So good speaking boundaries would be basically speaking from the I and not the you. And asking someone if it's a good time to talk, and like being diplomatic.
Does this like fall under this where you especially when you don't know whether someone knows something, you ask them if they know it instead of just saying it like they don't already know it,
or assuming they know it.
Yeah, like right. I think like a good example would be like instead of saying like, oh, like, well, like you hate me, to be like, well, I feel like right now I'm feeling like you hate me or something like that, which is, I know it sounds almost like it's the same thing, but it's not, because one is like, just like is expressing what you're feeling, and like it might not be true, like the person might not actually hate you,
right? So
they can have some space to be like, I don't like, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry for making you feel that way, or whatever.
That makes sense. I like that when I talk about, like, opinions in general, especially, like, if someone says, this band sucks versus I think this band sucks, I feel much more offended when they say this band sucks, because it makes it sound like it's universal.
Yes.
And everyone thinks that.
Yeah. Also, good example. So on the episode, they also talked about being over-boundaried versus under-boundaried, and this is... I mean, I'm going to do a Puffcast episode with Ben specifically about this, where he talks about being over-boundaried and I talk about being under-boundaried. So when you're over-boundaried, that means you basically have like walls up around you. So basically like feelings and like and clarity and stuff are not coming in or out. Like it seems like you're not listening, you're isolated, you're shut down. Oftentimes you like the reason why I guess people are this way is because like their family setting, they didn't their parents like didn't express feelings. They just kind of like shut down when they were angry at their kids instead of like talking to them about it. Whereas with underboundaried, everything goes in and out, which is like you're like very overly emotional, which is how I am. Which usually when that happens is because your upbringing had very chaotic boundaries, like. Sometimes things were very strict, but then sometimes were just like spankings or like fits of rage. Just like things are just like you couldn't understand what was going on.
Going off of boundaries, some tools to help cultivate good boundaries within your relationships are going from reactive behavior to adult behavior. Understanding that things aren't black and white, because sometimes, you know, both people are right and they're just not seeing each other's point of view, and that's one place where you kind of have to make compromise and end up in a gray area, because not everything in life is black and white.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm yellow.
Oh my god, Jenny, I did not. Oh, that took me a hot second.
Sorry, go ahead. Another thing I mentioned earlier is that ideas are observations, not facts. Often what you see as the truth is not the truth for everybody. And also, also a good idea to talk about things when everyone is calm, not when everyone's emotions are heightened. Because it's easy to go from angry to super angry,
Yeah.
and harder to go from angry to calm or understanding.
Definitely.
Yes.
Another good one, especially if you are over-boundaried, would be sharing yourself when you want to withdraw and staying connected when you feel upset. So basically, like what I was describing earlier, like timeouts and space for yourself are totally fine, but just completely shutting down and not being willing to talk anymore is not good.
So, other things to keep in mind when building good boundaries is not saying something bad or negative, even though you really want to. Also, don't wait until you're already in the situation to change it.
So the example that they give on the episode is if you tend to go home with men when you go to the bar or like on the first date or whatever, and you hate that about yourself, then you need to like work on not doing that before just like being in that moment and then hating yourself in that moment.
Right. And then the last one is know how to be good in self-care, because that is a personal responsibility. Because I think at the end of the day, you're still two different individuals. You both have different needs, and you can't rely on your partner to meet every single need, because that is, one, very codependent.
Yeah.
And two, it ends up becoming exhausting to have to be that person for, even if you, no matter how much you love them, like it's going to exhaust you both. And you have to be able to find things that you love and you enjoy doing, or even like self-care isn't even always something fun. Sometimes it's really hard to do it, but you have to be able to do that. So that way, when you bring yourself back to the relationship, you at least are in a better state of mind or a better state of being able to meet someone else's needs. That's not self-care.
I say to people a lot that I feel like people are either sleep people or food people. Like if I don't get to eat when I need to eat, I become very hangry and emotionally tired and physically tired and just like, I just can't do anything. Whereas like Ben, if he doesn't get enough sleep, he gets very like upset for the whole day. I know, Jenny, you're a both person, but I just feel like a lot of people are like lean more to the one or the other. Like,
right.
So like if you know you're someone who has like those, for example, like I know that I need to like, if we're going and sleeping somewhere, like I know I need to bring like a little something for me to eat in the morning in case I wake up earlier than everyone else.
Preparation.
Yep.
And understanding that boundaries are more about how we feel about something and less about what the person actually did.
Yeah, that's so hard to really like, I feel like that's so hard to explain to your partner, especially if it's when you're upset. That it's like, okay, look, it's less about the action that just happened and more about like my traumatic past with how I have like felt about this thing.
Right. Just because that doesn't bother someone else or yourself doesn't mean it doesn't bother your partner.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, I don't know if you guys have ever read Fables, which is like a comic book series from 2000s or something. It was when I was working at St. Mark's Comics. But there's like 25 trades or something like that, which is
I've heard of it.
A lot.
Guess what I'm gonna download?
It's real good. You will love it because you love Disney. It's basically like the public domain like Disney characters. Okay. Like Snow White and Cinderella and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Two of the main characters, Snow White and Bigby Wolf, who's based on the Big Bad Wolf, who by this time is able to be more human-like. He basically looks like a human unless he wants to turn into a wolf, kind of like Lupin style. They are really, really good couple who they're not together in the first couple issues, but then they get together and like they do a really good job showing like how they respect each other's boundaries.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like just a couple other things about boundaries is that it's kind of about giving each other space also to be your individual person. I think we kind of mentioned that. So allowing your partner to spend time with their friends and family, not being obsessive about checking up on who they're with and where they are.
Yeah. I will say a really good example about giving each other space to have their own individual hobbies 100% is Morticia and Gomez from the Addams Family.
Yes.
But they're also
that is ultimate couples goals.
Yes, they are the ultimate of couples goals, if there ever was one. Outside of Bob and Linda, but I'm sorry, I'm very biased towards Bob's Burgers.
I love them.
But they both, I forget what their hobbies are, but like, he loves fencing and playing with swords, and she loves gardening in her garden of death, and they understand that these are the things that make them happy without each other, but they are still willing to give each other that time and space to do. I think at one point, Morticia tries to join like a group of women like in the neighborhood, which I think it's like very hilarious because she's trying to make friends with the woman in the neighborhood. And yes, she is very much radically different, but it's something she wanted to do. And he's like, I support you fully. Go do it. And the same thing with her. I feel like that resonates with me a lot because I did. And I am dating someone now and I've shown them my schedule. And he's like, go do it. And I'm like, you sure? You're not going to see me for like a week and a half? He's like, he's like, I support you in what you're doing. I understand that this takes a lot of time and it makes you happy. I don't want you to not be able to do things you enjoy, like sewing, cosplaying. We're going to cosplay together now. Or even just like seeing your friends and going to work. Like, he understands and respects that I have those boundaries and I have those interests. Same with him. He really likes playing video games and I do not. I just don't know anything about them enough.
Yeah.
And I get so tired of seeing those tropes of like angry girlfriend doesn't let their boyfriend play video games. I'm like, it's fun for them. Like, just it's harmless fun. Like, it's so long as they're playing it at a somewhat healthy amount. Because I know we're all people. We all stay up late and do things. Like, what does it matter if they stay up late playing video games so long as they know that you're together and you still work together on that relationship?
I'm going to talk about Leslie and Ben some more because they are such unique individuals in their own right. Ben is like super fucking nerdy.
Yeah.
Loves accounting. And like, Leslie doesn't get any of that shit, but like, she gets him a Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
A throne of games. And like, pretends and like plays with him, even though she does it badly. And he doesn't like super get, for example, why her and the rest of Pawnee is so obsessed with little Sebastian. But like, he'll support her. Like, there's like all these little things that like, they're so different from each other, but they are very, very supportive of each other. And like, when she runs for the various political roles, he is always there every step of the way, even when it does not benefit him, because he takes his whole life into account and what his own goals are. And a lot of the time, his goal is to support Leslie. And I love that.
Yeah, and the only thing I hate about that is that in the real world, instead of like TV shows and stuff, when that scenario happens, when like a woman is like doing really well, like in charge, whatever, and their partner is like being very supportive of them and whatnot, oftentimes the man is labeled like weak and submissive towards them, and the woman is like a quote unquote bitch.
Or like she wears the man and the man
she wears the pants
in the relationship.
She wears the man. Oh my god. Sorry.
Where's the
You
skin
said she wears
suit
the
of a man?
Oh
Sorry.
Oh no!
My brain is not functioning.
And like something I hear a lot is like, oh well, like he's just going along with everything that she wants. Like she's completely controlling the relationship. Because like basically like if a relationship is healthy and a woman is able to like also like express her opinions, and a man in a heterosexual relationship is supporting her and just like looking at her with giant fucking hard eyes, then it's just not seen as the same way if the role was reversed.
You know what's funny is that there's a scene in Parks and Rec where basically Leslie is doing some speech and some men's rights activists come and like yell at her for like dominating her husband or whatever, and like they're like, free him, and like he talks and he's like, I fully support her in everything she does, and she's like, yeah, men's rights is nothing, it is literally nothing, and I'm like, hell yes.
Yeah. Fun fact: the main men's rights guy in that scene is Chris Gethard, who is I love him so much. He's a stand-up comedian in New York and has his own podcast based on mental health. And he has
really?
Beautiful Anonymous. And he did a HBO special about his mental health, about his like depression, called Career Suicide, that I highly recommend checking out.
Okay.
And he is not a men's rights activist.
Yes.
At all.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I love that.
Just a little fun fact. God, yeah, Parks and Rec is so good. Yeah, so some other boundaries things are, don't abuse technology to check on a partner. So, like, don't look at someone else's phone without their permission. Don't, like, have access to, like, their emails and shit without their permission.
There has to be a level of trust in the relationship. And if you feel as though you're getting to that point where you have to encroach on their privacy, you should have a conversation with them. And also, doing that is very creepy, and you're already breaking, like, every code of conduct of trust that you can have in a relationship.
Yeah. Trust each other and not require the partner to check in.
I think when we say check in, it's more of like when you're in a very unhealthy or toxic relationship where they're like, I have to know where you are every minute of the day. Like, what time did you get to work? What time did you leave work? What time did you get on the train? How long did it take you to drive from here to there? Like,
basically, in a healthy relationship, you won't have to obsessively check in. Yeah, because like, I know, because like there are definitely scenarios when you need to check in.
Right. For example, last year when I went away to Paris, this was like the beginning stages of me dating my now boyfriend. I just like randomly messaged him, be like, hey, so I'm going to a protest. He's like, wait, what? You're in a different country. And I'm like, well, I'd rather be protesting against sexual violence against women than doing anything else. Like, why would I just sit around and not doing anything? And he goes, please be safe. I need just like it, instead of being like, you need to tell me where you're going, or like every hour checking in on you, or even just saying, I don't want you to go. He's like, be safe. Let me know where you are, or like when you get home safe. And I was like, thank you for understanding that. And also thank you for not trying to stop me.
Yeah, definitely. Which goes into the next one, which is do not pressure the other to do things they don't want to do. Which is also don't try to force them not to do things they do want to do.
Yeah.
Another really big one is don't constantly accuse the other of cheating or being unfaithful, which I think if you have bad boundaries is really, really hard because you're always, worried some awful shit's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You have to trust your partner. Unless they're giving you reasons not to trust them, but in a healthy relationship.
Right.
Obviously, a huge one is, physical boundaries, meaning like enthusiastic consent. This is when you get to check in.
Yes.
to make sure your partner, even if you're in the middle of sex, still wants to be having sex with you.
Yes. And it is okay. And if you are in the middle of sex and you are no longer enjoying it, because sex should be about both people enjoying this, it is okay to say no.
Yeah, I've never understood coercion. Why would you want to have to convince someone to have sex with you? Like, I don't...
Because what you want is more important.
I know. It's just me trying to...
I know.
Understand.
People are different.
People are different. That's very true.
I think we covered a lot of the different signs of a healthy relationship, but other stuff I wanted to mention is that you and your partner are on the same page in terms of your basic values and your life goals. Mm-hmm. So you know what you want out of life, you have common goals, and you are committed to achieving these together. Yeah. Just like everything I mentioned about Ben and Leslie working together to accomplish both their work and their personal goals. They want kids, they're gonna get their triplets, baby.
Yeah, like, I think Carl and Ellie from Up would be a good example of that. Like, they decide they want to go on that big trip together, and so they're like constantly putting little money in the jar.
Yeah.
And they build their house together, and...
Like, throughout all the stages of their relationship, their friendship into marriage, they've always been communicative with each other, even though Carl does not speak as much. Ellie does most of the speaking, but she's able to... She articulates what she wants, and he seems like he doesn't want too much except to make her happy, which is very sweet. But they both have these goals together, which is get married, have a house, have kids, and it is very heartbreaking that she does end up passing away before they reach their dream goal together. But they've always been on the same page about where they are in their relationship.
Yes, because they have tons of photos together on the same page.
No! Literally!
Okay, and other signs that you're in a healthy relationship are you spend quality time together doing things that are mutually fulfilling, in addition to the being separate and doing your own individual thing. You encourage each other to grow and change and inspire each other to be better people. I think
Chidi and Eleanor, Good Place.
Yes, yes, queen. Yes, that's so true. That's a perfect example of that.
Yep, literally what the whole show's about.
God, that show's good.
Yeah, we're going to do an episode on that show. Just trying to find the perfect guest.
Also, when you respect each other's differences, even if you disagree on important issues.
Yeah, that's really hard.
And of course, when you share realistic expectations of the relationships, because it's easy, especially with media nowadays, or with media in general, to think about the perfect relationship.
Disney!
And like...
Not nowadays. Our last episode.
And each of you contributing your fair share to the relationships, whatever that is, because... your strengths and abilities are for the benefit of the team. And I say this knowing that it's not always going to be 50-50 in a relationship. Sometimes it's 80-20, and sometimes it's your partner is not doing well, and it's falling to you to kind of pick things up. It's up to you to kind of pick things up when it's not going to be equal, and hope that when the time comes, if anything is coming down on you, that your partner is also going to be there to support you, because like any relationship, it's a give and take, and it's not always going to be equal every single time.
I also have heard this really good advice from Justin McElroy from My Brother and Me. He says, always give 60% if you're able, because then you're both giving more than 50%. In that way, you're always able to reach a compromise.
That makes sense. If your earlier relationships were healthy relationships, it's easier for you to like kind of search that out, I think. It's just easier to know like how to be in healthy relationships, but if your earlier relationships were traumatic in any way, I feel like it's easier to fall into repeat traumatic relationships. So like me, for example, like I've only been in bad relationships or what I call non-relationships So like now that I'm in a healthy relationship, a lot of times it is really hard to not fuck up, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's like you have to form new patterns.
Yes. Yeah. You really do. Like a lot of times, like I'm just expecting things to like go really wrong. Like to be blunt, like sometimes like when Ben and I are fighting, like I'll scream or whatever, and he does not ever raise his voice to me. Ever. And he's said to me before, he's like, would this be easier for you if I screamed back at you? And of course I like start crying and say like, no. And he understands that it's because like that is what I have been used to. Just like any type of like small fighting escalates to like very aggressive fighting in past relationships. So I'm just so it's hard for my brain to not think that's what will happen. Right. So it's a lot of work for me to be like, that's not what's happening here. So take it down a notch. Or like I said before, like a lot of times we'll just chill. A lot of times like we'll be like, okay, like we need space for like a little bit and then let's come back to the conversation. Yeah.
So I think a lot of times people do need a third party to kind of mediate.
Hell yeah. Couples therapy. Do it early.
Yeah, I mean, like, you don't even need to have, like, huge problems to do couples therapy, I don't think.
No, you do not. And you don't need to be married to do it. You can do it before. The success rate is much higher the earlier you do it. Mm-hmm. Ben and I went to couples therapy for a couple sessions. Because, like, I mean, we got married, moved across the country, so, like, we don't have very many friends. We got littermate puppies on top of our 7-year-old dog. We bought a house. I own a small business. He is a teacher. Like
it sounded like you were playing a game of how much stress can we fit into 1 year.
Yeah,
like
it's a lot. Like so, it's just like of course you end up taking those things out on your partner if you're overloading yourself like that. So it's just like it's just good to have like a third party who is non-judgmental, who you can just kind of like tell what is happening to, and they can be like, okay, well, like, let's workshop how you're talking to each other and try to find like a different way to talk to each other and see how that works, or like just like little helpful things like that.
Right.
That you just like can't do when it's just the two of you.
And obviously this person should be impartial and not side with one of you.
Yeah, like your couples therapist like should not be either of your individual therapists if you were seeing an individual therapist. The job of a couples therapist is not to take someone's side. It's to help you like realize you both need to like compromise. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Apparently like 70% of relationships have shown improvement after couples counseling. Counselors who use emotionally focused therapy, also known as EFT, apparently the success rate is about 90%.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really high. And EFT works by helping a couple understand and reorganize their emotional responses to things. So by working with their emotional cycles, a couple can come to a greater understanding of each other, and this can help them create new cycles of interaction. So it sounds like what you were saying, like rewiring your mind almost.
And like stopping things before they escalate.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of the times, that's the thing about patterns, right? As soon as you start on it, you're like, it's so easy to just go along with it.
Yeah.
Because you know it. It's
absolutely
like clockwork. But with any habits in general,
it takes a bit of unlearning to do, because when you were in these like very unhealthy non-relationships, toxic relationships, you were basically learning how to survive, or like trying to find coping mechanisms to survive being in that relationship. And now that you're in this a healthy relationship with somebody, your brain still is telling you that you have to behave certain ways to survive, when instead you have to like unlearn and retrain yourself on ways to thrive, because you want to be able to both thrive in this relationship because it's good for you and it's good for your partner. And
Yeah.
It's called PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's me. Yeah, because I know how much my husband loves me, like, in this relationship, I am able to, and I do, in my head sometimes when we're arguing, I will say, like, this person loves you and you love this person. And so sometimes it will help me just like all of a sudden, like, stop arguing and be like, how are you? Or like, or like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or just like if he looks like sad or something, just be like, you know, like, I'm sorry that I've caused you to feel sad or whatever. Yeah. I mean, something I've said to people, just in general in life when they're kind of like being shitty to other people is like, does this make you feel good? Most of the time people will say no. And you're just like, okay, well, why don't you just like remind yourself that it doesn't make you feel good? And then maybe you won't say it. But that's boundary work. I don't know. I know a lot of people like don't go to therapy because of the cost for it. P.S. You know, vote for a candidate who wants Medicare for all. But also, just like licensed marriage or family therapists usually cost 20 to 40% less than a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And also, typically, if you're going to couples therapy versus individual therapy for a problem related to you as a couple, it takes a third fewer sessions to help get your marriage back on track or relationship back on track. I mean, like, yes, like sometimes marriage counseling does work in the opposite, and it basically gives the individuals the courage to basically end their relationship. But I personally don't think that's a bad thing. Like, a lot of people are like, okay, well, like half of marriage ends in divorce, which actually isn't a correct statistic anymore. It's less than that. But it's just like, well, previously marriages didn't end in divorce because like your grandpas were beating your grandmas and they were staying with them because they had to. And now wives are leaving. They're like, okay, like I'm not dealing with this shit.
Right.
Or just in general, not to make it gendered, but like abuse victims are leaving. Or just people who are unhappy. Like people who are just like realizing like this was not the marriage for me. Like we do not work as a couple. They're leaving, and that's fucking fine.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that should be as shamed as it is.
Okay, do we have anything else we want to say about healthy relationships?
Who's your favorite couple?
Bob and Linda.
Yeah, I mean, we could have brought them up several times. Like, I really like Bob and Linda because they get to keep their own identity. They're very much like Bob is Bob and Linda is Linda.
Linda like Bob? Like Bob oddly loves to garden, and Linda likes to take poops in fancy hotel bathrooms, and you know what? They make it work.
They love each other for it. They don't just make each other work, they love each other so much. Like, I'm always laughing because, like, you know, Linda is always, like, sing-talking and stuff, and Bob just, like, he's just, like, giggling to himself while, like, looking at her with, like, I love you eyes. And I'm like, relatable.
I think one of the things that we did leave out in a healthy relationship is that you grow together, because they've now been together 14, 15 years. And even if you're a couple just starting out, like, people change over time, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, you grow as a person, you experience new things in life, like personalities change, the way you think changes, is so long as you're willing to like grow and be a part of that, then I don't see anything wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. Harley and Ivy also. Harley's changed a lot as a character throughout the years. And Ivy has been there for her, and they are now canon.
Yes.
I guess the other thing I would want to say is like just like impact versus intent. Like, just because you mean to be saying something in a certain way, it doesn't mean that's what your partner is hearing.
Yeah, I always think that impact is more important than intent.
Yes. For most of my life, I have felt that intent was more important. But being married and spending every single day with the same person, I'm realizing impact is more important.
The last thing I wanted to add. I found this online. Robin from Geek Girl Brunch had shared it on Instagram. I'm just going to quickly list off some of the things I saw and the one thing that really stood out to me. So this is what conscious coupling looks like. A lot of the stuff we've already said, but the one that really stuck out to me was number 4 was relationships are not there to save or fix us. Yep. They are safe spaces of mutual evolution. I think it's important to understand that getting into a relationship isn't going to fix. I mean, it could, but that shouldn't be the reason you're getting in a relationship. Isn't going to fix your financial, mental, living situations. Like, you have to be getting into a relationship because this person makes you happy and you want to grow with this person, not because you think they're going to solve your problems. Because if you go into it with that mindset, it's only going to devolve from there. Because you cannot rely on another person, especially someone that you want to be very romantic with, to fix your problems for you, because they are your problems, and you should be finding the proper self-care to solve those issues you have.
Yeah, so I basically, so I've seen Ben while I was in therapy, and before that, I was pretty suicidal, and at my wedding, which was like only 6 months after Ben and I started dating, my parents both separately, because they don't talk to each other, thanked Ben for, like, saving my life. And it's like, look, I love Ben with every, ounce of my body and brain, but, like, what saved my life was therapy. And what made it so that I could be with someone who I was able to believe loved me was therapy.
Yeah.
Not the other way around. So, like, 100% what Robin is saying, like, your partner isn't going to save you. Like, that's not a thing. And also that's like, it's like pretty offensive to say to someone, because it's like, okay, like, therapy is a lot of fucking work. And, like, you made it basically seem as if, like, my partner magically whooshed me away.
They Disney
like a fucking Disney. Yeah. I was gonna say like a Disney prince.
Probably.
So my family has bad boundaries. Yeah. Another thing, I mean, we didn't talk about, like, sexual things too much other than just, like, enthusiastic consent, or, like, romance or whatever, but something that really helps me is, like, especially if Ben and I are having a hard time, is if we, like, take some time to literally just, like, sit with each other and just, like, compliment each other, or just, like, say what we love about each other. 'Cause it's, like, we tell each other we love each other every day, but it's hard to be like, okay, this is a thing that I definitely need to just, like, sit here and just hear, like, a list of, like, this is why I love you so much.
I think it helps to vocalize why you're in this relationship and not why you're in just, like, any relationship.
Exactly. Yeah, like, what I specifically love about being with you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the easiest way to help support our podcast. If you leave a 5-star review, we might pick it up and read it on air.
If you want to chat with us about the episode, our social medias are Fandom and Wellness on Instagram,
Fandom and Wellness on Facebook,
and Fandom Wellness on Twitter.
You can also find me at Classy Rebel Design on Instagram.
Me at Fan Mailbox on Instagram.
And you can find me at Little Petal on Instagram.
And if you want bonus content, join our Fandom family at patreon.com/Fandom and Wellness for Patreon exclusive geek sessions.
And remember, be kind and take no shit.
Burr, 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 burr.